Hello, and welcome to the Let's Talk Transformation podcasts. Today, we will be discussing digital transformation and scaling digital successfully in organizations. I am delighted to welcome Adam Bonnifield, Chief Executive Officer of Konux. Adam, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Adam, you've been working on this topic for years in various different industries and environments, ranging from co-founding a big data startup to innovation in the White House to looking at the rise of AI and what that means for organizations, which of course is where we met. Yeah. Working together on scaling transformation, but also creating different cultures to enable what digital has to offer. You're currently the CEO of Konux, which is a leading German AI scale-up looking to transform railway operations for a sustainable future. So can we start there? What's your Konux journey so far, and what are your biggest learnings about scaling digital operations?
In Konux. Yeah, so as you say, I mean, with Konux, it's very, I mean, we have this crazy moonshot ambition, which is to say to take one of the oldest industries in the world that we all depend on, that's vital for kind of all of our sustainability goals, that we move people onto rail and rail. But rail is one of the least digital environments in the world. I mean, it's like steel and concrete, and I mean, a lot of the processes around how to manage and operate these networks were developed hundreds of years ago, and have changed not that much since. So it's like where you and I met, which was in aviation. This is in some ways requires the digitization, but in the other ways, it has this pioneering spirit and is constantly reinventing itself. I think with rail, it's not this way. So with us, what we thought to do was to kind of take a lot of next generation technologies, a lot of the most advanced technologies, and figure out a way to retrofit them into this rail ecosystem. So we built this sensor network and had to design this yellow box that would be robust enough to get hit by gravel and ice at hundreds of kilometers per hour, and yet like fine-tuned enough to detect the hidden footprints of the trains moving across it, the infrastructure around it, basically to reconstruct the entire physical environment around the sensor in order to generate a kind of digital footprint, which we can then analyze using then separately this whole AI processing pipeline. And this is hard.
Yeah, like a yellow moonshot box.
And this is a very, very hard technical problem. But then, of course, there's all these other hard change management problems, because then you have to say, okay, so now if we can solve this technical problem and be all of a sudden able to say how you should operate the network, how you should maintain it, which assets are going to fail when, and what you should do about it, which is really important, right? Because the answers to these questions allow you to double the capacity of the network, which is just so important to the world, because we can't lay new track, at least not in Europe. And so we need to figure out how to reinvent the system. But then even still, you need to kind of walk through the users of the system along big change management journey, and this is its own devilish and exciting.
I can imagine. Well, we've already sort of touched on the legacy systems. Let's say it's quite a traditional slow moving industry with legacy systems, but what about the legacy people systems? So you talked about change management, how important was that to scaling? I'm going to call it the yellow moonshot box, but it doesn't have to be a yellow moonshot box, but because that's a very ambitious project, like you say, that's pioneering and miles away from what I would imagine the legacy system of rail is.
If we're talking about legacy people systems, I would say, and I'm curious if you agree, because I think this is true at Airbus as well, that very contrary to one's impression, the closer you get to the people on the ground dealing with the problem, the more openness you get to the kind of big transformational opportunities that you're trying to advance. So for us, I mean, the way we looked at it is, if you're a kind of engineer, an asset owner, somebody who's responsible for kind of maintaining track, for example, in the rail context, you are constantly drowning. You're given, jobs to do manual inspection very, very frequently. You have basically no visibility into what's going right or wrong. You're just guessing.
Mm.
Limited resources, people are retiring, and you're trying to make it all work. So you have this experience of constantly drowning. And so therefore, if somebody could come in and present a solution to you to say, like, look, use the same tools and systems that you're currently using, except instead of being, drowning and having no visibility, suddenly we turn the lights on and we say, here's the 10 things that you should be doing, and we'll help you do it. This to me is like very, very, very exciting. And this to me is the story of a lot of digital technology, which is people imagine digital technology as a kind of threat to people's jobs. If you look at, especially in the industrial context, what it really means is it's kind of like a threat to the most boring, the most frustrating and annoying parts of people's jobs. And it's hugely empowering to the skilled, creative, and enervating parts of people's jobs. And so this to me is the easiest part of the change management journey, just kind of bringing a new technology in that genuinely solves a real problem people have. And as long as that's the premise of the work, it can be very powerful. And then, of course, the people systems is as you get further and further away from the problem, and you get more into this middle management layer and top layer, you need to then, tell a story around transformation that does create genuine disruption to the way things are done, and to kind of the power centers and how people operate and stuff like this. So this is, to me, typically on like the top level, you get great buy-in because people are very excited by big innovation, change management projects. On the ground level, you get excitement that finally somebody's here to help me solve a big problem. And then the biggest part is the part in the middle where you're not experiencing the pain and you're not that excited about major transformation. You're just kind of trying to operate the system that you're in. Yeah, this is the trickiest bit.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. And I think the more you go and actually speak to people on the ground who have expectations, who know what they do, who know the pain points inside out, then you do get buy-in from that level. And it is the middle of the sandwich, isn't it? Like you said, where there's some type of inertia and also quite a lot of resistance to change.
Yeah.
So how do you move that block, Adam? What's the sort of secret sauce in your mind for actually, one, getting them to listen, and two, getting them to step with you on a different type of journey? And it doesn't have to be all at once. I'm hearing that, small is beautiful, which it is, and incremental change will build momentum in your system. But how do you look at that middle layer?
Well, I would say probably there are 3 lessons that I've taken away over the years. The first was a learning from the White House, where basically you have very fierce tribal rivalries, because as you can imagine, we have Democrats in the United States. I was working in the Obama administration. We had Democrats, the Republicans, civil servants, and political appointees, and it's like war.
There's a lot of tribes.
There's a lot of, I mean, it's like it's tribal by design, right? And we were working on this project called worker.gov, which was meant to be a place where any worker could come, and if they had some kind of workplace violation, whether it's discrimination or sexual harassment or any notion, they could kind of find out if what they did was wrong and then even take action, right? But but it sounds very simple, like this should just exist. You should be able to go to a website and find out if your rights were violated. But it's very hard because actually many different agencies are in charge of different kinds of rights. They don't want to work together because they hate each other. So what was very interesting to me is we had this project, we just had the concept worker.gov, and it was branded as an Obama initiative, and people understood that there was this kind of technology approach that was going to unify all of these systems, all these data systems in different agencies. And all these people showed up. We just held the meeting. We held it at the White House, and everyone showed up into the room. Somebody remarked, and these were like kind of the relevant, not heads of the agency, but the relevant ones, heads in charge of digital for the agency. They said, this is the first time I've ever been in a room with any of the other of them. And it was just kind of very interesting, even though this is their whole job. They actually shared the same space before. And we asked, like, why is this here? And they said, well, it's an innovation project, right? So this is a, and there's something about like the space created by like technology and innovation that got people, at least for that moment, to kind of like set aside their tribal rivalries. And this is a very powerful, it's so funny, you know, I think digital technology is very powerful per se, but the thing that is often like the the most kind of let's say the secret power of it is that just people all think of it as a bit magical, and so they're willing to like psychologically, you know, sort of kind of calm themselves a bit and just say, okay, I'm going to set this aside. We're in this now new safe space, innovation space. So that was very helpful. So that was a big one. Second learning, I would say, is what I was sort of alluding to before, that when you're actually solving a real problem, you know, a lot of times the proof is just in the pudding, and usually, like, if you can arm yourself with an incredible business case and a lot of data to back up what you're doing, is really useful, and really frame things as pushing solutions that people are desperate for, versus kind of starting with the change management, saying like, okay, first step is you're all going to get really annoyed and have to listen to me, and then the next step is you're going to get a lot of good stuff that you want. This, to me, I think, is the trickier thing to do. I rather would smuggle in the change management with the like cool thing that's solving people's problems. And then I think the third lesson that's often really neglected is where you can minimize the type of disruption that you're causing in people's lives, again, using technology in creative ways. So for us, for example, at Konux, when we like one of the things, let me put it to you this way. At Airbus, we saw, as I'm sure you saw, that as you introduce a new system, suddenly people are like, okay, I have yet another tool that I have to interact with. And maybe these people have like 20 tools that they're managing in their day-to-day life. It's like very, very painful for people. So at Konux, we were very clever to kind of say, we're going to integrate with all of your existing tooling. You're not going to really change actually a lot of aspects of your job. You're just going to get, instead of wrong answers, right answers. Instead of waiting a long time, you're going to get it faster. And so really thinking through the user experience and user journey creatively, and often using technology creatively in order to integrate and leverage legacy systems, can be very useful. And if one day, you know, we can upgrade the whole tool, great. But if in the meantime, managing that change by actually using technology creatively can be very smart, I think.
Because that supposes anticipation, doesn't it, Adam? So it supposes that people have had the time to have a look at the user journey, to have a look at the status quo of what exists and how many tools, whether it's 20 or 40 or whatever, and actually sort of take this to people. But I mean, I like the fact that creative spaces, people get excited about them, probably because for them, they're new, they don't know what's in them. So there's no real accountability there for them yet. So they can sort of go in there free of accountability and think differently. But you can't have one without the other, can you? You can't have like tools without process and without people, and you can't have people without process and tools. So how do we create a step in that journey where you actually take the time, Adam, at all levels, so I'm thinking of C-suite and the middle management and the people, to actually look at what they need, what they feel and what they think? Because I completely agree with you. If you go in there with, this is really going to help you, and then you look at the reactions to change, it's incredibly helpful. If you go, here's a new tool and please just use it, that's probably a lot less helpful.
Yes, I think that's fair. You know, it's funny because honestly, I mean, I would fight about this certainly at the White House, right? Because we have many kinds of people, and each of them own their own work, and so we saw different ways of doing it. You know, some who came straight up from the top and said, this is going to be led by the, you know, director of the agency, and it's just happening, and get in line. So at the FBI, that's how they did it. You know, we're gonna change how we work at the FBI. Director of the FBI, James Comey, said, we're doing it. You know,
this is what it looks like.
and for the FBI, you know, that worked actually. You know, and then in a different context where, you know, people were more operationally accountable, and I said, you had this experience of just drowning. then we could just start by offering solutions. And then a lot of the process change and culture changed around it because people were just desperate for the solutions. There's a very good analogy for like what kind of organization you have, which is based on the kind of the STAR model that you
Yep.
either startup, turnaround, accelerating, success, and realignment. And I find that depending on where your organization is, it kind of is differently suited for different approaches. And, to some extent, I think it's also if you're the leader in the organization, so I guess if somebody's listening to this and they're thinking, I'm the person who's supposed to bring about this change. I think it also depends on what your superpower is. Because at Airbus, like, when I saw you, Susie, walk into a room of people who all kind of were tribally opposed to each other and kind of brought this fierce energy into it and sort of, took command of the situation and really got at like what was scaring people and exciting people, and then kind of created this almost like energetic aura in the room. I was like, this is great, but I could never do that, right?
Everyone has a superpower.
That's not my superpower, right? Like I could figure out, what is the technology solution to that where the people are drowning, and then hopefully bring in other people to, with their own superpowers. But to me, this is how I think about it. So I tend to see many problems as technology problems because it's what I love and what excites me. And
that's your lens. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I see it, right? But other people say, well, no, technology is just the sort of window dressing. What this is really about is process change and culture change and stuff like this. And because that's their lens, right? So I'm afraid I don't have I don't have the perfect formula. I think it depends on the person.
But I think it's a brilliant illustration of whoever's head of, it's not necessarily just his or her job, because we can't do this on our own. And that's, what you've just been saying about different superpowers and what different people bring to the table means that, you can't do it on your own. And I think if I come back to innovation methods like Agile that are meant to create this space can quite easily get shoehorned into the existing status quo of, okay, we do Scrum, so everything's going to be all right. So, what's your advice on making your organization agile, which is essentially what we're talking about? It's what you've done in Konux, it's what we did in Airbus. But how did we do that? And we're also back to the middle management layer, aren't we? Because there are ways of doing things that, unless you have the culture behind agile, don't get changed, although you put different tools in.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, for sure, some of these agile ways of working are extremely rigid, process-oriented. I mean, if they're implemented in a certain way, that they're very process-oriented, very rigid, not resilient, not dynamic as they were originally to be. And so for sure, if you focus on the process versus some of the underlying kind of culture and philosophy behind it, you'll entirely miss it, and in fact make some of the rigidity and some of the problems worse. You'll make the organization more rigid. So what is the trick to being a more agile organization, or what is the way of making, what is the question exactly? What is the way of making the organization more agile?
Yeah, how do you create a more agile organization? And I'm taking organization as the sort of evolving being. So with organizational design, the ways of working, and the way you create ecosystems both inside and outside the organization. Because agile came to mind when you were talking about the White House, saying, oh, this is the first time they've ever been in the room together. Right. And what came to my mind was, oh, multifunctional teams. And my thought from that was, oh, multifunctional teams are part of agile, and then often it just gets stuck as a multifunctional team.
Yeah, that's fair.
And they just function within the existing status quo.
Yeah, that's fair. That's very fair. And I think you're right to talk about culture. Maybe there's even something more fundamental. I mean, maybe there's something that is where culture is the output of it. Where it relates to kind of the mindset of the people in the team or in the organization. And I found that when people started zooming out, and like I said, technology can be great for that because it gets rid of that mind space of saying, what if, let's start thinking in a utopian way, right? But when people start zooming out and start imagining themselves to be very empowered. So it's like, imagine if you can do anything. B, think about kind of on the highest level, what is their kind of mission and purpose? Um, uh, which like, certainly in the context of the White House, people go in for the best reasons. Their job is to save lives, improve people's lives, solve real problems for people who are suffering. And then, C, hold themselves accountable to some kind of outcome. These are very good starting points. But I think in people's jobs, you don't always have all three at the same time. Certainly you're not in this mindset. And I will say, even for some of these teams that I've been a part of that were brought in, I would always just be surprised how people would be kind of like walking around, clocking in, clocking out, as if, we weren't there to help save the world, right? And just be like, and I would get very frustrated, and say, guys, like, there are burning buildings everywhere. We're firefighters. We've got lots of water. And it's like, if you have that mentality, you just want to say, go, go, go,
yeah.
And then a lot of the BS of the processes that don't matter, the tribal conflicts that don't matter, the systems and things that are getting in the way, you kind of can have a ruthless clarity that pushes that all to the side. So for me, that's like very much a mindset thing, though. And it's about, getting people to zoom out, take accountability, have an optimistic vision that also holds themselves to a high standard. This to me is also just the magic of building teams anyway. I think it seems to be that agility is a very good ingredient of a successful team, but I think that this is just a nice way to build a team, any team.
Yeah, but I'm also hearing that you're being explicit, Adam, about what's in the team, what it's going to do, the accountability that sits there, and also the behavior that the group are expecting to get there, which for me is often what's missing. And the more we get into digital, the more we need what keeps us human as well, in terms of skill sets, and we get these T profiles. So how do you manage? It brings me straight onto upskilling and talent. How do you manage and to attract and retain talent in such a competitive market?
Yes. Well, and then let me say one more comment on what you said. This to me is like also the magic of why, from inside large organizations, that people kind of glamorize startups.
Yeah.
And I remember like being brought into these larger organizations and in kind of, these panels and saying like, oh, teach us from your startup life,
teach us how to think as a startup.
how do we figure this out, and it's kind of like, whoa, you have no idea how poorly performing we are organizationally relative to a successful Fortune 100 company, except for the fact that we have one thing that tends not to exist in a Fortune 100 company, which is that we, for better or worse, know exactly what our mission is and are feeling 100% accountable for completing it, which you can lose sight of as the size grows. Yeah. So with that, just one thing could be very powerful. It's so powerful that people inside much higher performing organizations think that these startups are actually even better than their company, when in fact they're run by 20 somethings who have no idea what they're doing.
But they've got personal agency and accountability, haven't they? Exactly. That's what you're saying.
They have this kind of accountability. And in terms of talent, it depends what kind of talent I think you're trying to attract and what kind of setup that you have. And it's been very interesting thinking about talent, because the kind of talent that you need to make kind of these big transformation missions, I think is very different. But therefore, I think you need to be selective in a different way. It's been this big movement, especially post-COVID, to be like very much focused on managing work-life balance, on moving to more and more remote work, protecting psychological safety because of all the issues that happened both during COVID and because it's more important to people, I think, than ever before. And to some extent, this has been an interesting movement. And I think a lot of these mission-driven organizations and transformational organizations have to some extent gone in a slightly different direction to say, like, if you really care about a mission and if you are getting a lot of personal fulfillment from it and joy from it, it can kind of sustain and protect you in a very beautiful way. And so therefore, you know, in like what I will say is like there's a lot of the problems that a lot of large organizations or sort of like, let's say, less mission driven organizations have had in just like remotivating employees, getting them back into the office and getting them kind of refocused and reprioritizing what they're doing is like less of a problem if you have the kind of animating mission that everyone's all on board with and feeling very connected to already in place. So this for me has been a bit lucky, because having always been a part of these organizations, you know, when you're surrounded by kind of high performing, motivated people who really care about what they do, it's very addicting. And then the problem is like, I think the place you want to be at is where you have a team of people where you're like, I'm learning more from these people than I can imagine learning from anyone else. And so therefore, retaining talent almost takes care of itself, because you're like, we all care, we're all working together, we all care about what we're doing, and I'm learning more than I ever would before. And I'm the kind of person who cares about that. So if you have this fit, then it could be very nice. I mean, it's sort of then a self-stirring pot.
It is, isn't it? But it often sits in larger organizations, it sits in satellite structures.
Yeah.
For very good reasons. So it sits, you know, innovation structures, satellite structures, or digital factories or whatever. And I've seen that, you know, you've got Konux Labs, which is also dedicated structure for innovation. Is that the same type of idea? And if so, is it around showing how processes and business can work differently and then positively contaminating the rest of the organization? Or
yes, that was the idea. And it is a silly idea, of course, because we were already a startup. So we're innovating ourselves. It is silly. However, this was what was necessary. So basically,
there are no silly ideas, Adam.
Well, you know,
it's just a different idea.
it was kind of, let's say, I don't know. It was kind of like a clumsy idea in the sense that we were, you know, we weren't 100,000 person organization. So let's, you know, and we should already be disruptive. But the problem that we were solving was we had this huge first product that that built kind of our company and was, you know, was our cash cow and was and is and was driving our business forward. But so much of the way we built products was all based on this one example. So basically what it was is an effort to say, let's step outside of this and let's kind of have a small team that can kind of build out new ways of working without reference to the original you know, set of technologies and everything like this, with the goal that it would be disintegrated and ultimately merged into the rest of how we did product and engineering, which by the way has happened as of this year. So this was
great. Okay.
This was kind of a complete end-to-end story, basically. And I guess we just didn't update the website yet, but we will update it. But this has happened as of, let's say, a month ago. And that's exactly how it worked, right? Like we built out all these ways of working. We built out a lot of, especially like these early prototyping techniques we never had, because we had this very mature product. And we made the decision at the time to say we don't want to kind of onboard all of the bloat of like a very, very large system that's already built. So we're going to put it out separately. But then when we integrate it, we're going to kind of like carve away at the big system, the big mature system, to kind of merge the two and blend the two. And I think in large organizations, they do it the same way. And I think the harder thing for large organizations is actually doing the integration.
Yes, exactly.
Nobody wants to ultimately join the mothership.
No, and that's my observation, is that a lot of great stuff happens there, but it's very hard to put it back into the mothership, particularly from not just processes and digital platforms and different business models. It's also getting it accepted, isn't it, into that's how we do things around here.
Yes. And yeah, I'm curious what you would say, because I've seen very few examples of it going very cleanly. I mean, usually, if it works, it's usually in a very messy way, and I've seen it be messy in like 100 different ways. So I'm curious how
Yeah, well, it's the antibodies, isn't it, that stay in the system of two completely different cultures.
Yeah.
You know, one business as usual and one more disruptive, more innovative. But essentially, I think we come back to our very first conversation of, if you start that work as you're starting the satellite structure, then
Right.
people get used to the fact that they're bringing them something new, and it's not to impose it on them, it's to actually improve their existing pain points.
Well, that's very fair. And I will say that's the one thing that I've seen done so badly and so wrong so many times in these like satellite teams,
Yeah.
where they basically build out these quote unquote proofs of concept, where they say like, our job is going to be to play with the most exciting, cool technology without even reference to what the future application of it should be. But we're going to have these super smart people who just want to work on quantum computing or AI or
Yeah.
whatever autonomy, and we're going to do very small experiments that don't really go anywhere. Alienates the large organization because they're like, well, we're not cool enough to use quantum computers, and and then of course it's pointless from the innovation teams because they're not actually scaling the impact of what they do. And then it creates what I've always known as kind of this valley of death problem, where you have the concept just immediately hitting this like death point, and then nothing on the other side, right? And for sure, this is the wrong way to do it, and it produces the problem that you describe, which is just like the rest of the organization just becomes hostile to the to the work, and it doesn't, and therefore there's no beautiful merging of two ways of working.
Yeah, because you've got to transform and perform at the same time, haven't you? And that will be scaled given the size of the organization that you're either working in or with. But
Yeah.
what's your best practice then for upskilling for digital? Because, you know, I see quite a lot of people saying, oh, we've got an academy for digital, but it's just hard skills. And as we've just talked about for the last 10, 15 minutes, I think there's a business case for best practice of bringing harder and softer skills, as they're known today, together for this culture that digital will enable. But of course, you need the different sort of interpersonal skills to enable it to scale it across an organization.
Yes, that's true. You know, I'd say even before you talk about soft skills, even in terms of hard skills, I would say I think sometimes there's a mistake of assuming that these kind of fancy elite innovation teams have all the skills.
Oh, yes. That's an assumption. You're right.
That actually like makes all the money and changes the world, and like these people are the unskilled people that need to be unskilled, but these other people that aren't generating in value and are just playing around and tinkering with their toys, these are the highly skilled people. So I always, and I believe me, I always thought of myself as one of the highly skilled, innovative people until I joined a big organization. Actually, I haven't learned anything in my life. So I think, I mean, to me, Airbus is a perfect example of this. Like, the engineers at Airbus are the best in the world.
Yeah.
The people who do production at Airbus are the best in the world. Like, there's so much to learn from the way they work, and thinking of things in terms of incredible scale and process management and complexity management, all of which are required if you're ever going to have an impact on the world. So so therefore I think there's almost this like mutual learning that happens synergistically when you are forced to kind of say, okay, as you said, building the scale from the beginning. So this is always something that it's important to keep in mind, because often, anyway, I guess I've always seen it less as kind of like upskilling, more as like a kind of fusing of different ways of working, if that makes sense. And then in terms of soft skills, I think probably you're right. That really is where you need a lot of upskilling, because this, like, in the digital era, there's so many more, that just the way we work is so different, because information can be so easily combined and spread and kind of like repurposed. It creates an environment so much more naturally suited to collaboration, and also to like rapid learning and learning and adjusting, right? And I think this is what you were alluding to before, that these are really this agility and kind of sort of more collaborative orientation to work is the hardest thing to bring into an organization, and maybe is the secret thing that like the innovation team has, that the regular or the mainstream organization lacks.
But I think that's a great example, Adam, of the fact that learning, unlearning, relearning, whatever we call that sort of learning agility, is not enough on its own. Like you say, if you don't understand the business, the processes, and I come right back to the beginning of this conversation of going to ask the people who actually do what they do, you know, what their pain points are and how they could do it better. So bringing those two worlds together for me is one of the biggest challenges, but it's exactly what you're doing at Konux. So that's why I was really interested in the labs, and you've managed to put it back in. So that's brilliant. But that's
well, also we weren't so different I mean, we were, you know, still a 150 person organization, so it's everyone knows each other, and it's a lot easier. When you're in 100,000 people, it's a lot harder, right? And so
of course, but it's a model that those larger organizations can take and think, okay, what works for us?
Yes.
What works for us in the learnings of that model, even though it's on a different scale in a different, because often startups, when they're scaling their culture, it is about what works for us at our scale. But I see the same things in larger organizations. They just scale very differently.
No, it's totally true. And I will say we did have culture change when all these things happened. One of the culture changes that we had to embrace was this idea of, you know, as you can imagine, we're working in safety critical infrastructure. You know, the sort of like first time right philosophy of sort of saying like there will be no mistakes. If this is extremely expensive, you know, this is the most expensive capacity cost of an engineering team, to say like we refuse to accept any failure, any risk at any point of the you know, of the overall, let's say in the overall system, most in the broadest sense. And this is in some ways very healthy. But even like, you know, safety critical industries, they quickly, I mean, if they're good, they quickly at least partially unlearn this instinct, because you need to accept risk and failure in order to produce high quality, safe products. So and you know, you saw that at Airbus all the time. I remember when I first started at Airbus, we were doing a tour, and we saw oil leaking from the exterior of the aircraft, and I was really panicked by this. And I was like, why is it leaking oil? And he says, no, it's supposed to leak a little bit. If it stops leaking, that's the problem.
That's the problem.
Oil. And I said, oh, okay. So there's some, you know, like there is like, I mean, nothing can be designed perfectly. Things are designed within some threshold of quality. And then this is great. I mean, this is how you build resilience into systems. And as long as but you have to be beautifully expert at managing that risk. And this is so therefore somehow having this kind of fierce desire to get to the perfect system, at the same time you have this like kind of like disruptive desire to rethink, to re-engineer, to accept risk, to wonder and be creative. These are very healthy competitive impulses, I think.
Yeah, as long as like you say, the resilience is creative, i.e. it's not just banging at it until, you know, rebounding until it's perfect, but actually, you know, thinking about it differently and doing something that creates probably a little bit of a different end product and a little bit of a different process, and it probably won't be the process next time, but then that's what it's about, isn't it?
But I think that's why it was always very useful, especially for, you know, doing this kind of transformation in large organizations, to take people from the organization. And I think, for example, our teams at Airbus, the best people were not the people like me who were hired from outside of aerospace, but rather the people who were like the high performing misfits of their team within the company, who knew everything, knows everyone, and really got like why things worked the way that they did, but then saw creatively a different way of doing things, and we're sort of temperamentally different from this. And this to me is the secret weapon of large organizations, that they're just producing these people who have somehow both superpowers at the same time. And it's so crazy to me that they're not more effectively weaponized throughout organizations, because if you're producing these geniuses who understand the system as it is and are temperamentally thinking constantly, how could this be better? and they're just stuck often in the organization itself without any avenue to improve things.
Yeah.
This is a shame. And this is where I think a lot of these centers of excellence and innovation teams spring up out of, because you can't help but realize we just need to give a home for these people and set them to work.
Yeah, and scale what they've got because they do understand both systems. You're right. Okay, time is running. So we've talked about the lessons learned, what you've seen, what you're currently doing at Konux. What's your future vision for the rail industry, and what needs to happen for it to be flexible enough to move into the digital era? Let's put it that way.
Number one, we need to have a vast ecosystem of data collection technologies. Data, and this has to exist in many different areas. So, we want to fully outfit the infrastructure of rail with a variety of different sensing technologies, and in fact, like make it so that anyone can just kind of plug something into the platform, and then it could kind of upload data to the cloud. But this is very challenging because you need to deal with a lot of problems, and you need to supply energy, or at least have very good batteries. And then you also need to be able to integrate many different kinds of sensors together. And this will have to be done by multiple companies. I mean, Konux is part of the answer, but it also needs to kind of play nicely and integrate with other very innovative academics and small, medium enterprises. And then we need to kind of, therefore, like with this massive kind of data network, we need to kind of re-envision how we do things in many different ways. So it's like today, Konux has provided some answers to this, right? So instead of waiting for assets to break and then just fixing them in a very expensive way, we are providing the answer to predicting when things are failing, why they're failing, and then therefore asking the people who operate and maintain these assets to think differently about it, to plan differently. But then there's many different pieces of this problem, right? Like it's also about how you organize the network, and maintain a massive network and do planning around it. But then even how you operate it, right? So, today we have fixed timetables that are not resilient at all to any kind of disruption. So, for example, if you have, somehow a single disruption, a train being blocked or delayed, which could then miss its connection and miss the train it's supposed to join with, blah, 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 and it could create havoc through the network. So like in hour one, you could see one delay causing, hours and hours and hours of delays that spread throughout the network because we don't have this resilience built into the system. But this will require a different way of thinking about network operation, and which, if we have the data to do it and some of the basic systems for doing it, is totally possible. So one way to think about it is that rail is a huge system with which can be optimized, which is currently to some extent optimized locally, but which could be optimized globally across, because all of these things are interconnected. Like better we maintain the network, the more uptime it has, which means the less disruption there is, so trains are moving smoothly through it. If those are maintained and operated well, then we could like avoid these catastrophic delays. So by thinking of the system very globally and connecting data in interesting ways, as I said, we can vastly improve the capacity and availability of the network. What this will mean is that, basically we can operate far more trains at higher capacity, and therefore, make it the answer to our big mobility challenge, our big sustainability challenge in mobility, which is that, you see this in Europe, that every European country is trying to get people off of airplanes and onto trains. And there's no way to do it unless we solve this problem. So this is somehow a burning platform. The good news is that we have pretty good solutions for it. So it's just a matter of getting these into people's hands and doing the change management necessary to take people there. But the technology exists.
Right.
And then as you say, it's all the people process and other stuff, that are still ahead of us.
Yeah, it's a different management system, isn't it, for business ecosystems?
Yeah.
Adam, okay, time is running. Would you have a final thought or nugget of learning to share with our listeners before we wrap up this session around scaling digital operations successfully?
I think that my nugget is that the scaling journey is so interesting because I've seen, now I've had these 3 different experiences in a very big scaled setting where, one at the White House, we were kind of on the on sort of this innovation team in Airbus. It was kind of from the inside of the mothership, so to speak. And then as a startup kind of outside the industry trying to penetrate it. But somehow it all feels the same. And I think that it can be broken down into various stages. Where you start, it's always the fun bit, where you're doing the fun innovation stuff and you're just trying to show people what the power of the technology is. And then I think the kind of like stage 2 is the really hard bit, where it's you're actually trying to build technologies that do fit inside the organization so that they can scale before it's fully accepted and before it's fully understood how powerful it is. And then finally, the third bit, which is less hard but maybe more painful, is the integration bit, where you're trying to kind of then sort of like merge the ways of working. I would say the vast majority of time, what I've seen of all the projects I've worked on is it fails in the second stage. That we can't figure out how to prove the value fast enough. And as you said, the antibodies win and kind of reject it before it could get off the ground. And to me, the nugget of wisdom is just get that part right. Have something really exciting, really good. Do the change management very thoughtfully and carefully, and don't neglect the importance in the first stage of like really building something that works within the context of the organization that you're trying to disrupt. That would be my nugget.
All right, super. Thank you. I'm going to leave our listeners with that and how they can innovate on getting the second stage right and anticipating those problems. Adam, thanks so much for coming and sharing your thoughts, your insights, your experience. Where can people find out more about Konux and you and what you do?
You can find us on LinkedIn, find us online, Google us. Yeah, we'll have some fun news to share in the coming weeks. So you could also find us in your local tech or rail blog pretty soon.
Okay, excellent. Okay, I'll leave that shrouded in mystery for the moment. Okay, thanks, Adam. Thanks for a great conversation.
All right, cheers. Thank you.